In Zhang City, the afternoon sun shone softly, accompanied by a gentle breeze. On the balcony of a high-rise apartment, a faint glimmer flickered briefly. A man raised his head to glance toward the sun, then checked the time on his watch before closing the sunshade of his astronomical telescope. In the far distance, beneath the clouds, the city lay eerily silent. Above the skyline, a massive cluster of clouds loomed like a mountain, towering and unmoving. Beep, beep. The sound of an alert came from his watch. 5:00 p.m. There was still an hour and a half until nightfall. The man pulled on an iron chain, causing a specially designed alloy shutter to rise outside what was originally a floor-to-ceiling window. The room darkened as the sunlight filtered through the gaps between the alloy panels, casting linear streaks of light over a living room packed with supplies. Buzz, buzz. A strange sound echoed, and the man paused what he was doing, tilting his head to listen. In an instant, his expression changed. He grabbed the short dagger for self-defense, fastening it to his waist, and carefully stepped out of the apartment, climbing the stairs to the rooftop. A helicopter flew low from the distance, the roar of its massive rotor blades growing increasingly deafening. Whoosh! The man retrieved the long water pipe from who knows where, tying an orange tattered cloth to one end and waving it rapidly at the helicopter. Inside the helicopter, a girl wearing headphones noticed the flash of orange and silently traced her finger across the window. Mr. Wen. The pilot, seated in the front, also spotted the orange signal on the rooftop and turned to ask tentatively. The man referred to as Mr. Wen was a middle-aged man in a sharp suit. Glancing out the window briefly, he shut his eyes with an indifferent expression and said coldly, "Dream on. Who cares about the lives of these paupers?" The pilot fell silent. Noticing the girl's gaze, the middle-aged man raised his voice. "What's wrong?" Feeling sympathetic. "Remember this, they're not the same as us. If tomorrow were the end of the world, we'd still be the last ones to die. Got it? TCH. The girl's expression turned icy, her gaze fixed on the scene outside. She clearly held no regard for the man's words. Whoosh! The helicopter roared past the sky above. The man on the distant rooftop, watching the scene unfold, slowly lowered his pole and gazed thoughtfully into the distance. "It, what a good aircraft. Such a waste." Woovo. A few minutes later, an urgent alarm blared inside the helicopter. Stall warning, stall warning. What's going on? We've suddenly lost lift. It might be an unknown air vortex. The young co-pilot's expression changed drastically as he scrambled to stabilize the flight. The sudden crisis threw everyone into chaos. We're in the air. In broad daylight. Could we have encountered some kind of ghost? Shouted the once calm middle-aged man in the back. The pilot glanced at the onboard radar but found nothing unusual. Suddenly, the light inside the cockpit shifted, as if covered by a shadow. Alarmed, he craned his neck to look upward through the windshield. What he saw made his pupils contract, his face turning deathly pale in an instant. Above them, hidden within the massive cloud formation, a grotesque black shadow flickered faintly, blotting out the sky and sun. The clouds churned violently, and the wind surged with ferocity. The helicopter was caught in a tremendous suction force, rising uncontrollably higher into the sky. Warning! Warning! Dip! Captain, what do we do? Panicked, the young co-pilot turned to look at the pilot, only to find him transfixed. Following his gaze, the co-pilot looked up as well. The thin layers of clouds dispersed as their altitude increased. Finally, the two men in the cockpit saw the black shadow within the clouds clearly. It was a massive humanoid corpse. The colossal humanoid corpse floated face down within the cloud layers, its shadow blocking out the sky and sun. The portion of its torso visible beyond the clouds spanned at least 10 kilometers in length. The giant corpse hung motionless, resembling a floating continent at first glance. Its body was entirely gray-black, with withered, canyon-like wrinkles etched into its dried skin. Its pitch black, hollow eyes exuded no trace of life but carried an eerie sense of dread as it floated high above the city. Ah! Terrified screams erupted within the now helpless helicopter. In the back, the girl's face turned ghostly pale, her pupils consumed by an encroaching darkness. The hurricane winds tore mercilessly at the helicopter's fuselage. The industrial machine, weighing several tons, was reduced to nothing more than a speck of dust in the air. The invisible suction force instantly dragged it upward, swallowing it into the clouds. Moments later, it disappeared without a trace. Back on the rooftop, Lin Xian watched the entire scene unfold, his expression dark. Buzz. At that moment, a flicker of light flashed across the horizon. Realizing something, Lin Xian cursed under his breath, **T, and quickly headed back to his apartment. He shut the window shutters, sprayed deodorizer in the stairwell, and locked the iron doors. All he could do now was wait for night to fall. Beep, beep. 6:45 p.m. For the second time, the horizon flickered with light. The sun had set, and the city was swallowed by darkness. In the pitch-black city, sinister whispers echoed through the alleys, while piercing howls reverberated in the shadows. Terror loomed. The eerie had arrived. Inside the room, the record player spun softly, filling the dim room with the gentle rhythm of jazz. Lin Xian, donning an apron, stood calmly in the kitchen, leisurely opening a can of beans. On the electric stove, a pot of tomato and beef brisket soup simmered, releasing a tantalizing aroma. On the cutting board lay a sprig of vibrant green cilantro, a rare harvest from the rooftop garden. In times like these, even a touch of green could bring a fleeting sense of joy. He chopped the cilantro finely, sprinkling it into the pot with care. Not a single piece escaped his attention, even the tiny fragment sticking to the knife was added. Outside, the night loomed, deep and hollow with despair. From below the floorboards, faint, deliberate footsteps echoed. Somewhere in the pitch-black corridors, an eerie, raspy breathing could be heard. But Lin Xian remained unbothered. As if accustomed to the unnatural surroundings, he set the table with practiced ease, eating his dinner in the glow of a flickering candle. The sunrise now lasts until noon. The next polar night is less than 5 days away, he murmured. At the table, while eating, Lin Xian jotted notes into a small journal. The batteries and generator in his storage room were primarily used to keep the refrigerator running and power the alarm system. Lighting, however, was avoided entirely. It would turn his shelter into a glowing beacon in a city drenched in darkness. After finishing his meal, he began sorting through the day's haul. 2 cans, 2 bottles of water, and a pack of expired chips. Strangely, the large backpack wasn't filled with food and water but instead held a collection of miscellaneous junk, a few broken phones, an old speaker, a busted shaver, and a hairdryer. To Lin Xian, these useless items were treasures. With a faint smile, he placed his hand on the old speaker. In an instant, a faint phosphorescent glow appeared around his hand and in his pupils. His hair fluttered gently, even though there was no wind, as an unusual force seemed to awaken. Moments later, the glow disappeared, and the speaker he had touched suddenly decayed into a small pile of brownish ash that scattered onto the floor. Devouring successful, +1 mechanical source point, +1 mechanical devour skill proficiency. Bonus, strength +1. Current mechanical heart level, LV.1176/500. Note: upgrading the mechanical heart grants special skill rewards. At LV3, LV6, and LV9, mysterious awakenings will be unlocked. Attributes: Strength, LV122/50. Speed, LV028/30. Defense, LV015/30. Current skills: Mechanical Devour, LV.1265/300. Mechanical Manufacturing, LV.1112/300. Mechanical scan, passive. Mechanical repair, passive. Mechanical operation, passive. The familiar system interface lit up before him. Lin Xian's eyes brightened. Who would have thought that dismantling an old speaker would boost his strength by 1 point? Do not underestimate 1 point in strength. Ever since his strength leveled up from LV.0 to LV.1, Lin Xian had experienced a transformation. He used to be a scrawny college student who struggled to carry a bucket of water. But now, he could easily perform 100 one-armed push UPS in a single go. The change was astonishing. At first, he thought his ability was weak, but over time, he realized its vast potential. If he could continue upgrading his strength and speed, his combat abilities might one day rival those of the mutated ability users with enhanced physiques. Devouring successful, +1 mechanical source point. Devouring successful, +1 mechanical source point. The next few broken phones didn't provide any attribute boosts, much to his disappointment. It seems larger, more powerful devices yield better results, he muttered, recalling a past attempt to devour a car engine. That single effort had boosted his mechanical source points by 20 and granted 5 attribute points. However, the reason he now chose smaller objects and insisted on bringing them back to his apartment was simple. Larger mechanical structures took significantly more time and energy to devour. When he devoured the car engine, it had taken him over an hour and left him completely drained, as though he'd been through a horrifying ordeal. He was lucky to have escaped that situation without being attacked by zombies or ghouls. His survival was nothing short of miraculous. Since then, Lin Xian had learned his lesson. Patience was key. Rushing only led to danger. He adhered strictly to the principle of survival first. But what he didn't expect was that when he devoured the hairdryer, the interface in front of him suddenly flashed gold. Devouring successful, +1 mechanical source point, +1 mechanical devour skill proficiency. Bonus, you've acquired the wind cannon skill. Wind cannon LV.1, focus air at your fingertips and release it instantly to cause destructive force. A skill. Lin Xian's pupils contracted. This was the first time he had gained a skill from his mechanical devour ability. Who would have thought that consuming ordinary items could unlock skills? A hairdryer, and now a wind cannon? What kind of logic was this? Suppressing his excitement, Lin Xian focused his thoughts. He raised his finger and pointed toward the sofa in the distance. Whoosh! A faint sound of air slicing through the room followed. The cushion on the sofa suddenly burst as if struck by something invisible. The cotton stuffing inside scattered like snowflakes. Holy S! Lin Xian's heartbeat accelerated. He had deliberately restrained the power of the wind cannon to avoid making too much noise, but even this small test demonstrated its destructive potential. If he unleashed it at full strength, it could undoubtedly become a deadly weapon. In the year 2069, Apocalypse Day arrived. Across the globe, 13 massive devouring zones, each with a diameter of hundreds of kilometers, emerged. Officially named the Abysses, these zones behaved like mysterious living entities, radiating waves of darkness that spread outward. These waves of darkness, known as the dark tides, engulfed new areas every 2 days, expanding by several hundred kilometers at a time. Daylight grew shorter, and once a certain cycle was reached, the affected areas would enter a polar night. During the polar night, extreme weather events, biological infections, zombie hordes, and unspeakable horrors from the abyss descended upon the world. Humanity was forced to embark on a mass migration to escape the advancing darkness. After the apocalypse began, a small portion of the population mutated under the radiation from the abyss, gaining various supernatural abilities. This gave them a significant edge in the struggle for survival. Lin Xian was one such individual. Soon, survival groups led by ability users began to emerge like sparks in the dark. John City Emergency Report, All 6 monitoring teams from the northwest and southwest sectors have gone missing. Attention survivors, flee eastward. Founded by the ability user Lu Wei, the Oasis convoy will depart tomorrow at 4 p.m. from the Walmart in White District. Only individuals aged 16 to 50 in good physical condition will be accepted. The elderly, children, and women will not be taken, but if you have firearms, weapons, or large amounts of supplies, you may bring one additional family member. Jiang City Bunker welcomes all ability users and beautiful women. We are based in a military-grade nuclear shelter in Jiang City, with over 300 members, clear division of labor, and the capacity to withstand a polar night. I'm at Block A, Apartment 1304 in Mingwan Community. I have plenty of supplies and a house specially modified for survival. I only accept women aged 16 to 30, no ugly ones. Ananda is a messenger sent by the Creator to cleanse the evil thoughts of humanity. As long as you feel sincere remorse, you can join our paradise faith. Free yourself from calamity by devoutly offering water, food, and pure young maidens. The Savior will spare the innocent. For those seeking redemption in hardship, contact 139. I am Professor Wan from the Jiang City Research Institute. According to my calculations, Jiang City will be swallowed by the polar night again in 5 days. This time, there will be no sunrise. Ha ha ha, it's over. Physics, how ridiculous. There's no escape. No one can escape. Ha 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 ha. In the darkness, Lin Xian slowly adjusted the radio dial, tuning through one extreme message after another. It seemed that after experiencing the first polar night, most of the survivors in Jiang City had already fled. The last polar night, which lasted for a full 21 days, had turned the once million-strong Jiang City into a hellscape. And who knew how long the next polar night would last? Would his supplies hold out until dawn finally returned? Infinite Train Recruitment Project assemble a fully armed heavy train to race along the 320,000-kilometer planetary orbital rail. Lin Xian unlocked his phone and opened a post he had made on a local forum before the last polar night began. The responses were sparse, and most of them were dripping with sarcasm. You've watched too much Snowpiercer, haven't you? Bro, the global power grid has collapsed. How are you gonna run it without electricity? Even with a gas-powered locomotive, it burns at least 50 liters of fuel an hour. If I had that much fuel, I'd just drive an off-road truck instead. Post-apocalyptic clown. Wait till you hit a broken track and get a reality check. Sounds great in theory, a mobile fortress made of steel. Not even a zombie horde could break through. But dreams are dreams. It's just not realistic. Idiot. In the post, Lin Xian had outlined his plan to build a fortress train equipped with various functional carriages, living quarters, supply storage, medical facilities, planting areas, energy generation, and production units. He was actively recruiting members, but the requirements were strict. Each member had to either possess supernatural abilities or specialized skills relevant to the train's operations. A fully armed, unstoppable heavy train racing eastward along the planetary rail to escape the polar night. Even if it had to stop along the way, its fortress-like armored carriages would be able to withstand zombie hordes and the assaults of eerie anomalies lurking in the dark. It was both wildly romantic and utterly insane. But after the polar night, most of the internet and power infrastructure had collapsed. The post hadn't received any new responses in a long time. Now, aside from the scattered voices of survivors broadcasting over the radio, the entire Jiang City was eerily silent. The next day, when the sky finally brightened, it was already 1 p.m. The black shroud of night receded without the gradual appearance of a sunrise, leaving the sky clear and slightly angled toward the afternoon sun. Daylight now arrived an hour later than the day before. Based on Jiang City's location and its summer time zone, with sunset still around 6:45 p.m., it meant that in just 5 more days, dawn would no longer come to this place. Inside the apartment, Lin Xian strapped his short dagger onto his backpack. Jumping from his balcony into the neighboring unit, he followed his established route, weaving downward through the building until he reached the access point to an underground civil defense tunnel. This led him into a section of the subway system, specifically a maintenance zone at the former University Town Station. Since the apocalypse began, the station had fallen into complete disrepair. The zombies on the platform had already been cleared out by Lin Xian, turning this area into his designated train assembly site. Walking deeper into the tunnel, Lin Xian approached the rusted and neglected track. Sitting there in the shadows was a massive steel behemoth, the Whale 03E heavy gas turbine locomotive. This 200-ton mechanical monstrosity was Lin Xian's secret weapon for escaping the polar night. Click. He turned on a flashlight, and its white beam cut through the pitch-black tunnel. Staring at the massive locomotive in front of him, Lin Xian's nerves tingled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The Whale 03E was a masterpiece from 30 years ago, jointly developed by Alstom Transport and China CRRC Corporation. Based on Alstom's primal locomotive technology platform, it was meticulously designed as a high-powered, 10-cylinder gas turbine freight engine. The locomotive spanned over 36 meters in length and had a width of 3.2 meters. Beneath its imposing frame lay staggering energy potential, a traction power of 18,500 horsepower, equivalent to the combined output of dozens of supercars. It could haul tens of thousands of tons of cargo with ease. For Lin Xian, this locomotive was the perfect platform for his mechanical abilities. Its discovery had sparked the vision for the Infinite Train project. Check the transmission shaft, brake pads, and power turbines, Lin Xian muttered to himself. His mechanical heart ability came with 3 foundational skills: mechanical scan, mechanical repair, and mechanical operation. Simply put, as long as Lin Xian understood the principles of a machine he touched, he could perform basic controls, repairs, and even generate holographic blueprints of the device via scanning. These 3 passive skills, however, were not upgradable. The Whale 03E required fuel for primary propulsion and electricity for auxiliary functions. While fuel was one of the scarcest resources in the post-apocalyptic world, Lin Xian's mechanical heart could directly power the locomotive using his ability, completely bypassing the need for conventional energy sources. This capability was nothing short of miraculous. However, the output power depended on his personal stamina. At his current limits, the range of operation was still restricted. That said, with Lin Xian acting as a human battery, scavenging additional resources along the way, and possibly acquiring power generation systems or small nuclear reactors, the energy issue could eventually be resolved completely. Beyond the locomotive itself, Lin Xian had modified 3 additional carriages to serve specific functions. These were repurposed from old passenger cars. Living carriage, used for storing supplies and serving as living quarters. Empty carriage, reserved for future use, intended as a farming zone to grow green plants. Ideally, it would house a water-oxygen circulation system for plant cultivation. However, lacking expertise in this area, Lin Xian had left it temporarily empty. Tool carriage, a storage area for tools, a motorcycle, a crane, a welding machine, and any materials scavenged along the way. Lin Xian walked to the 4th carriage and placed his hand on the vehicle's exterior. Activating his mechanical heart, a custom hydraulic lift descended. Inside the carriage was a motorcycle designed to help him collect resources during stops. Climbing onto the lift, he brought down a welding machine. By the tracks lay a pile of materials, mostly rolled steel plates, high-strength tungsten steel, and manganese steel, all scavenged from Zhang City's specialized steel factory. These were ideal materials for crafting the armored fortress he envisioned. Buzz. A glowing interface appeared before Lin Xian, displaying blueprints he had drawn himself. Among them was a design for composite armor plating. There were also firearm blueprints, such as the Glock 23.40 caliber handgun blueprints he had extracted using his mechanical scan skill after disarming a group of raiders. The problem, however, was the resource requirements. Hyallochromium molybdenum steel, 120 grams. Basic steel, 300 grams. Plastic, 195 grams. Lin Xian groaned in frustration. Compared to standardized items like this, he found it much easier to rely on his mechanical manufacturing skill and existing materials to DIY custom parts. Clang. Lin Xian's eyes glowed faintly as the steel in front of him began to levitate, seemingly of its own accord. Under immense pressure, the metal quickly reshaped and fused into a single composite structure. In just 10 minutes, a 1.5 x 0.9 meter piece of composite armor was complete. Manufacturing and assembling parts required intense focus, and with no one else to assist him, Lin Xian had to work as efficiently as possible during daylight hours. Several hours passed, and Lin Xian managed to assemble several sets of grid, double-layered composite armor windows. Using a small mobile crane from the tool carriage, he carefully hoisted the heavy armor panels into position along the carriage edges, welding them securely in place. The Whale 03ES driver compartment was fully connected to the rest of the train via isolation doors, ensuring that the entire train could function as a single fortress. Lin Xian had named the train Infinite, and it embodied his dream of survival. The first carriage served as his living quarters and storage for most of his supplies. The second carriage, as mentioned, would eventually become a planting area. For now, though, it remained empty. The third carriage housed tools, machinery, and the materials he was gathering to expand his project. As Lin Xian was engrossed in building his mobile fortress, his phone suddenly vibrated. Startled, he froze. Most satellites were now defunct, and satellite communications were nearly non-existent. He had kept his phone charged primarily for storing data, maps, and emergencies. He hadn't expected a call. Answering cautiously, he heard a nervous female voice on the other end. "Lin Xian, are you still in Zhang City? I want to join your Infinite Train project." The caller was Chen Sixuan, Lin Xian's former university lecturer. She was the only person from his contact list he had managed to reach in the early days of the apocalypse. Chen Sixuan was 27, a stunningly beautiful woman without a boyfriend, practically an anomaly in Zhang City's pre-apocalyptic culture, which encouraged early marriage and childbirth. Tall and elegant, born into an intellectual family, she was the quintessential urban rich and beautiful. At the university, she was a figure admired by all. At the start, when Lin Xian had mentioned his train project to Chen Sixuan, she had outright rejected the idea. Lin Xian hadn't disclosed his ability to her, and the plan sounded too far-fetched. Back then, Chen Sixuan still clung to the naive belief that a rescue team would come for her. But after Zhang City experienced its first polar night, countless people perished in despair, and the eerie horrors of the night consumed the last shreds of survivors' sanity. Lin Xian had witnessed the grim atrocities that emerged from the collapse of social order. In this brutal world, a woman without abilities had less value in survival teams than a barrel of gasoline. He had assumed Chen Sixuan had either left with some group or met her end. Receiving her call now left him surprised. If she hadn't escaped, how had she managed to survive for so long? In an apartment, the door was tightly locked, and the curtains drawn shut. Chen Sixuan, disheveled and dressed in loungewear, sat curled up in the corner of a sofa. Her expression was tense as she stared at her phone's nearly depleted battery. Her once soft, full lips were pale, and her body trembled involuntarily. For 2 months, she had endured the darkest period of her life, scarce food, endless nights, and unrelenting fear. Each night, the terrifying sounds from the darkness jolted her awake. She was frail, thinner than ever, and her mind teetered on the edge of collapse. At first, she had waited for the arrival of an official rescue team. Some of her old admirers even brought supplies to her door. But when she realized the entire world's order had crumbled, and the polar night had come, she understood she was trapped in a nightmare. Desperation set in, and she began reaching out for help. But after the polar night passed, most of Jiang City's population seemed to vanish. Those who remained were either migrating eastward or had descended into madness. The survival teams that were willing to take her in had only one request: send a nude photo to prove her worth. It was then that Chen Sixuan fully grasped the reality. She was no longer the adored university teacher or the woman who once captured the hearts of Jiang City's elite. She was now a liability. In this apocalypse, even a trace of beauty required her to offer herself up in exchange for a mere glance from others. Just as she was about to lose all hope, she suddenly remembered Lin Xian. Her power banks had long been drained, and her phone had only a sliver of battery left. At this moment, no matter how crazy his plans seemed, even just hearing someone's voice gave her hope. "Ms. Chen, are you okay?" On the other end, Lin Xian's calm and steady tone instantly eased her nerves. Lin Xian, I'm still alive. Are you still in Jiang City?" Her voice trembled as she bit her finger nervously. After a long silence, Lin Xian's voice finally came through again. "Yes." Chen Sixuan's entire body shook as relief washed over her. Her eyes lit up with hope, and she hurriedly spoke into the phone. "Where are you? Can you come pick me up?" She regretted it as soon as the words left her mouth. The request sounded absurd. She recalled how, just days ago, she had reached out to a team planning to escape east. When she asked them the same question, they had ridiculed her mercilessly. Their mocking tone implied, "Who do you think you are? A princess." Quickly, she corrected herself. No, I mean, where are you? Can I come to you?" Desperation left her with no choice. If her phone died, she would be left with only two options: continue hiding in her apartment, waiting for death, or wander aimlessly outside until the zombies tore her to shreds. "Ms. Chen," Lin Xian's voice came through again, calm and detached. "Do you have supplies? Or have you awakened an ability?" Hearing this, Chen Sixuan's heart sank. She glanced at her barren apartment. Her lips trembled as she answered in a voice that was almost a sob. "And no, I don't. If you need me to." She never thought she'd stoop so low as to plead with one of her former students, but before she could finish, Lin Xian cut her off. "Sorry, Ms. Chen. My supplies are limited. If you want to join my plan, you need to bring some value. Physical needs mean nothing to me." Lin Xian had no interest in charity. No one believed in his train project, so he was building it for himself. Every step he took was to escape the polar night, not to play the hero. His calm yet firm tone carried an odd sense of security, but it also plunged Chen Sixuan into utter despair. "All right then. Good luck, Ms. Chen." Lin Xian's voice was indifferent. With a sigh, he prepared to hang up. On the other end of the call, Chen Sixuan's body went cold. Just as Lin Xian was about to disconnect, she suddenly snapped, clutching the phone tightly and shouting, "Wait." Her eyes widened, and her chest heaved with rapid breaths as she yelled. The planetary orbital rail was constructed starting in 2039, spanning 126 countries and 34 regions, crossing 9 continents and 4 oceans, and passing through all 13 current abyss-devouring zones. The rail's total length exceeds 320,000 kilometers. My father was a Level 1 maintenance engineer for the planetary rail, and I know the locations of all 1,266 stations and 625 maintenance segments along the line. Also, I'm fluent in multiple languages. I can be your translator. I eat very little, and I know how to cook. As long as you take me with you, I'll do anything you ask." She screamed the last sentence with every ounce of strength she had. A long silence followed on the other end. Chen Sixuan sat frozen, her body trembling. Her nails dug into her thighs so deeply that blood began to beat at the surface. "Your location. I'll come get you." 6 simple words. Chen Sixuan felt dizzy, her mind spinning. Snapping back to reality, she frantically blurted out, I am at Building 3, Unit 901, Yeshui Gardens, Zhangzhou Road." Beep. Before she could repeat her address, her phone screen went black. It had shut down completely. Panicking, she pressed the power button repeatedly, but there was no response. She wasn't even sure if Lin Xian had caught her address. Frustration overwhelmed her, and she bit her lip so hard it bled. "Ah!" She let out a furious scream and hurled the phone at the wall, shattering it into pieces. He heard it. He definitely heard it. Muttering to herself, Chen Sixuan tried to calm her fraying nerves. To distract herself from despair, she immediately began rummaging through her apartment for any books or materials related to the planetary orbital rail. On the other end, Lin Xian stared at the phone in his hand, letting out a sigh. The once admired and respected Miss Chen Sixuan, now speaking to him with a pleading tone, even going as far as to offer sexual favors. It was a grim reminder of how this hellish apocalypse could twist people into monsters, turning human dignity into a mockery. Still, her words had struck a chord with him. The planetary orbital rail circled the entire globe, a route filled with unknown dangers. Having someone familiar with its intricacies would be far better than relying on a dead map stripped of its GPS and navigational functions. After all, maps couldn't indicate maintenance segments or special connection routes. Of course, there was another reason Chen Sixuan was someone Lin Xian knew personally. In the apocalypse, people instinctively sought out the security of groups, and familiar faces were the easiest to trust. Setting aside the phone, Lin Xian glanced at the time before returning to his welding work. There wasn't enough time left in the day, and the progress of preparing the train couldn't afford to stall. Beep, beep. 6 p.m. There were 45 minutes left until nightfall. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Lin Xian gazed at the thick, tank-like armored windows he had just installed on both sides of the third carriage. A sense of accomplishment welled up in his chest. Next on the list, a generator, heating equipment, water purification, a fridge, and an advanced monitoring system, he murmured to himself. And then there's the defensive gear, automated weapon systems, a radar system, and other protective measures. Right, the living quarters. I need a big bed, a bathtub. Might as well add a recreation area, maybe a gaming zone or something. How about storing a few thousand movies, TV shows, and games? Lin Xian's eyes sparkled with excitement as he rattled off his ideas. At that moment, he realized something profound. In this apocalypse, life was becoming something to look forward to again. Back at his apartment, Lin Xian took out a bottle of disinfectant mixed with bleach from behind the door. He carefully sprayed the solution around the entrance and the hallway outside. Only after completing this ritual did he step inside, lock the anti-theft door, and secure the iron chain. The first thing he did was pull out his phone and open the map to locate Chen Sixuan's position. The first rule of the apocalypse: be cautious of the night. The second rule of the apocalypse: never act recklessly. Lin Xian never fought an unprepared battle. Zhang City had completely fallen. Those who remained were either survivors huddled in shelters, marauding raiders prowling the streets, or hordes of zombies. Nighttime, however, was even more terrifying. To this day, no one truly understood how many bizarre horrors roamed the darkness. From the accounts of survivors on various radio frequencies, the things encountered in the night were indescribable, unexplainable, and deadly. Few who came across them lived to tell the tale. 7.2 kilometers, not exactly close, Lin Xian murmured as he studied the map. Before the apocalypse, such a distance would take no more than a 15-minute cab ride. But now, with the transportation system collapsed and bridges damaged, even using his motorcycle would take at least half an hour. And he had no idea what the situation over there was like. In the apocalypse, risking your life to save someone was only worth it for family or maybe your mother. Lin Xian's gaze flickered as he sighed inwardly. Ms. Chen, I hope you're worth the risk. At 6:45 p.m., the darkness began to descend. Lin Xian pulled down the iron shutters on his windows and started preparing dinner. He hadn't gone scavenging for supplies today. By now, the supermarkets and convenience stores in Zhang City had been ransacked countless times by fleeing survivors. Even finding a single packet of ketchup was a near impossible task. Fortunately, Lin Xian's scavenging extended beyond food and water. He hunted for mechanical items that most survivors wouldn't even glance at. 2:42 a.m. A faint sound jolted Lin Xian awake from his shallow sleep. He sat up instantly, his eyes locking on the door in the dim darkness. The sound seemed to come from the hallway outside. He grabbed his short dagger for defense and quietly moved to the door. The door had been reinforced with steel plates several times and was much sturdier than a standard anti-theft door. Still, against those things, Lin Xian wasn't entirely confident. Living in a high-rise, his only escape route was the staircase in the hallway. Lin Xian pressed his eye to the peephole, scanning the corridor. The hallway was pitch black, with only the faint green glow of the emergency lights faintly outlining the walls and floor. After observing for a while and seeing nothing, Lin Xian turned to go back to bed. But just as he took 2 steps away, a strange knocking sound came from the iron door behind him. Knock, knock. The 2 slow, deliberate knocks sent a chill racing up Lin Xian's spine. Someone was really there? Or had those things discovered his hiding spot? His expression turned grim as he stepped back to the door. After a moment of hesitation, he tightened his grip on the short dagger, held his breath, and cautiously peered through the peephole again. Hiss. What he saw made Lin Xian suck in a sharp breath. Under the eerie green glow of the emergency lights, a figure stood in the hallway, a frail old man wearing a black funeral robe. The man's face was pale and gaunt, his sunken features resembling that of a corpse. His eyes, decayed and lifeless, were a ghastly gray-black hue, exuding a suffocating aura of death. Most horrifying of all, the corpse-like old man's dead eyes seemed to be staring directly at Lin Xian through the peephole. Lin Xian instinctively staggered back 2 steps, his face pale with shock. Isn't that Grandpa Li from downstairs? But Grandpa Li had died long ago. Lin Xian's expression grew solemn as he stepped back further. There was no need to think twice. Whatever stood outside his door was no longer human. A zombie. But zombies didn't knock on doors. Lin Xian's face darkened. If this was one of the bizarre entities from the night, then he was in deep trouble. Grandpa Li, Lin Xian muttered under his breath, couldn't you just enjoy your peace in the coffin? What are you doing back here to suffer? Time dragged on, and Lin Xian's sleep was entirely gone. He leaned against the wall by the door, gripping his dagger tightly. The knocking didn't come again. But then, something even more unnerving happened. From the other side of the wall he was leaning on, faint scratching sounds began to emerge. The sound of nails scraping against the wall. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Lin Xian's scalp tingle. It felt as if something was just on the other side of the wall, clawing incessantly. **T. Lin Xian muttered under his breath as he jumped back, staring at the wall in front of him. Is this thing trying to dig its way in? He felt a wave of confusion and unease. Whatever was outside seemed to sense his presence. It was now separated from him by nothing more than the thin layer of the wall. At this moment, Lin Xian's best option was to hold his breath, remain perfectly still, and avoid making any noise. As long as the door to his apartment remained unbreached, he was temporarily safe. Simultaneously, He mentally prepared his escape route. Most of his supplies had already been moved to the infinite train. In the apartment, he only had a few days' worth of food and water left, along with the generator and batteries. Time dragged on, second by second, as the eerie scratching sounds from the other side of the wall tormented Lin Xian like a haunting melody, burrowing into his mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound ceased. Lin Xian exhaled in relief and cautiously moved to check through the peephole again. However, the sight before him made every hair on his body stand on end. Somehow, a young girl had appeared in the hallway. She was lying on the ground, covered in blood, her body weakly trembling as she struggled to sit up. Reaching her hand toward the door, she whispered faintly, "Help me, help me." Lin Xian narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharp. The girl looked no older than 15 or 16. Her outfit was completely out of place for the post-apocalyptic world: short shorts, a low-rise crop top, and a bright-colored baseball jacket. Around her neck hung a pair of wireless earphones. She looked youthful and trendy, like someone plucked straight from a pre-apocalyptic high school. If not for the blood covering her face, Lin Xian might have thought she was just the neighbor's little sister stopping by late at night. But Lin Xian stayed silent. Just moments ago, he had seen the corpse of Grandpolly standing eerily outside. Now, suddenly, there was a bloodied teenage girl begging for help. It was beyond suspicious. These entities that emerged in the night were unpredictable and sinister. Besides, Lin Xian had no relationship with this girl. Opening the door would be risking his own life. Time ticked by, and it was now 5 a.m. There were still at least 9 hours until daylight. Through the peephole, Lin Xian saw that the girl's face had turned pale. She was slumped on the ground, unconscious. "Damn it, is this some kind of monster setting a trap to trick me into opening the door?" Lin Xian muttered under his breath, rubbing his temples. This was far more unsettling than any zombie encounter he'd ever had. Unable to resist his curiosity, he looked through the peephole again. What he saw this time made his pupils contract sharply. Grandpolly had reappeared, standing stiffly beside the unconscious girl. His head was lowered, as though sniffing at her. Moments later, Grandpolly moved with a stiff, awkward shuffle, positioning himself directly in front of the girl. Then, slowly, he began to bend down toward her. Lin Xian's eyes widened in shock as he noticed something horrifying. Clinging to the back of Grandpolly's corpse was a monstrous, centipede-like creature with long, slender legs and a shiny black body. The creature was enormous, covering almost the entirety of the old man's back. "What the F is that?" Lin Xian gasped, cold sweat breaking out across his body. The creature's legs moved in slow, deliberate motions, manipulating Grandpolly's body like a grotesque puppet. Then, as its many legs twitched and scratched at the corpse's back, Grandpolly raised his arm stiffly and lunged toward the unconscious girl. "Agah!" A spine-chilling shriek echoed. Watching the scene unfold, Lin Xian's expression darkened. The girl was still so young. Even though he had witnessed countless tragedies over the past few days, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. Just as Lin Xian thought the girl was about to be devoured by the zombie and the monstrous insect, an invisible shockwave suddenly erupted from her body. It roared outward with a deafening boom. Before Lin Xian could react, the door in front of him, along with himself, was blasted away by a powerful gust. Boom! In an instant, all the glass in the room shattered, and the furniture splintered into pieces. Lin Xian was thrown into a state of shock as he was flung by the shockwave and crashed hard against the iron grills of the living room window. His ears buzzed loudly, rendering him momentarily disoriented. Thankfully, his body had been enhanced, otherwise, he would have passed out on the spot. The sudden upheaval shook the entire apartment building. Almost immediately, a cacophony of howls erupted, and swarms of zombies began flooding the hallway. "Damn it!" Struggling to his feet, Lin Xian cursed silently. At that moment, the zombified Uncle Li, controlled by the monstrous insect, had already stumbled into the living room without him noticing. Switching on his flashlight, Lin Xian was horrified to see Uncle Li crawling on all fours. The zombie suddenly leapt from the floor with a strange, guttural cry and hurled its foul, putrid body straight at him. Lin Xian gasped sharply, his blood pumping wildly. He instinctively retreated a few steps and raised his hand to unleash a wind cannon. Whoosh! Fueled by panic and rage, Lin Xian poured every ounce of strength into the attack. A rapid wind spear shot out with explosive force. Arg! In an instant, black blood splattered everywhere. The grotesque corpse took a direct hit to the face. Half of its head was blown apart as it rolled to the side, scattering chunks of rotten flesh on the ground. Shaken but not hesitating, Lin Xian grabbed his short blade and charged forward decisively. He plunged the blade straight through the black insect. Squelch! Screech! The black insect let out an eerie shriek, its numerous legs convulsing madly. Lin Xian gripped the short blade tightly, not daring to let his guard down. Unexpectedly, the black insect twisted its body and severed itself from the blade. It then quickly scurried into the shadows. Are you kidding me? This thing is that smart? Lin Xian cursed under his breath. The commotion had drawn a horde of zombies charging toward his once safe haven. With no time to lose, he grabbed his backpack, stuffed it with whatever supplies he could, and looked toward the corridor. The girl was lying motionless on the ground. Even after causing such a massive disturbance, she was still unconscious. Lin Xian's mind raced. It wasn't hard to guess this girl was likely an ability user. But why had she sought him out? Unable to figure it out, he gritted his teeth, deciding to save her first and deal with the questions later. Scooping the girl into his arms, Lin Xian bolted down the emergency stairs. With his shelter destroyed, he had no choice but to charge into the underground tunnels behind him. Countless zombies swarmed the stairwell, relentlessly pursuing him as he ran. Splat! Splat! Along the way, Lin Xian repeatedly used his wind cannon to take out several zombies. Finally, he reached the infinite train. Placing his hand on the train's body, the mechanical heart activated, opening the cockpit door. Lin Xian quickly shoved the girl inside before climbing in himself. Bang! The heavy cabin door shut, and the corridor lights flickered on. Leaning against the steel wall, Lin Xian let out a long sigh of relief. Ugh! Ugh! The zombie horde surged forward, surrounding the train in mere minutes. Countless claws scratched against the train, producing ear-piercing screeches. What the zombies didn't understand was that the massive steel behemoth in front of them weighed several hundred tons. Even its thinnest armor plate was at least 40 millimeters thick. Regular bullets couldn't even leave a dent, let alone the rotting claws of zombies. Wiping sweat from his brow, Lin Xian moved to the first carriage and pulled up one of the blackout shades. The train's interior lights illuminated the grotesque, rotting faces of the zombies outside. Snap! He pulled the shade back down. Fortunately, he had managed to complete the train's armor installation earlier that day. Just to be sure, he performed a quick inspection before turning off all the lights inside the train. Afterward, he headed to the cockpit and retrieved the black remote control. On the other side of the tunnel, he had set up a large remote-controlled speaker as a decoy, just in case he was ever besieged by a zombie horde while trying to start the train. Beep! A booming sound echoed from afar, immediately drawing the zombies away in a frenzied rush. Within moments, the sound of scratching against the train's exterior gradually faded into silence. Inside the train, Lin Xian let out a breath of relief. Turning on his phone flashlight, he began examining the girl's condition. To his surprise, the girl didn't have a single external injury. The blood on her body didn't even seem to be hers. This girl, there was definitely something strange about her. Lin Xian gazed at the sleeping little girl, feeling a sense of helplessness. Her sudden appearance had completely disrupted his plans. The most critical issue was his gut feeling this girl definitely possessed some kind of special ability. Otherwise, there was no way she could have survived unscathed, running through the perilous night and ending up outside his door without so much as a scratch. Taking a girl like this with him was undoubtedly a potential liability, a ticking time bomb. After a moment of deliberation, Lin Xian grabbed some rope and securely tied the sleeping girl's hands and feet. Then, he carried her to the number 2 carriage, placed her on a blanket, and let her lie down. After finishing everything, he returned to the number 1 carriage to figure out his next steps. Furrowing his brow, Lin Xian reopened a map and began searching again. If I start the train tomorrow and head along line 3 to find Teacher Chen, wouldn't that be a shorter route? The idea was bold. If it worked, he could reduce much of the danger along the way and simultaneously test the locomotive's capabilities. Sure enough, after checking the map, Lin Xian realized that the residential complex where Chen Sixuan lived was less than 300 meters from the nearest subway station. Het. He smirked and said, "What a prime location, Teacher Chen. You really nailed it with this property." It was a sleepless night. For the first time, Lin Xian spent the night on the infinite train. Although the steel fortress he had built with his own hands provided him with significant security, the night's upheaval still left him unsettled. This was his first encounter with the Eyrie of the night. Although it had been just a single monstrous insect, the thing was utterly disgusting. Not only that, but it was clearly much smarter than the zombies. On top of that, now there was a mysterious girl lying in his train carriage. How could he possibly sleep soundly under these circumstances? At 2 p.m., daylight came an hour later than expected. Lin Xian remained in the subway tunnel, surrounded by pitch-black darkness, but his watch indicated that it was already daytime outside. Sitting in the infinite train's driver's seat, a faint glow flickered in his eyes as he seemed to connect with the enormous machine's aura. Vroom! The turbocharger roared to life. The crankshaft and connecting rods emitted sharp metallic clinks as the horizon gate system opened. Clack! The amber-orange headlights instantly illuminated the dark subway tunnel, making it as bright as daylight. Lin Xian's gaze sharpened. "It's time to go, my friend." Clang! Clang! The steel colossus, dormant for decades, roared back to life. Dust and iron filings slid off its frame as the infinite train, dragging 3 armored carriages behind it, slowly merged from the maintenance track onto the main subway line. Devouring the black mist ahead, it charged forward with an earth-shaking roar. This is the feeling. Lin Xian's heart raced with excitement. Feeling the roaring power of the train beneath him, the shadows of the previous night were quickly swept away. At this moment, he felt as if he and the entire train had become one. A surge of invincibility coursed through him. Clang, 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 clang. Outside the elevated tracks near University City Station, a few zombies in tattered uniforms wandered aimlessly. Suddenly, these creatures simultaneously noticed the rumbling noise from the tunnel. The tracks beneath their feet began to tremble. Aga! Grkk grrrkk. The sound escaped from their rotting throats, like the dying breath of ancient wood. As if drawn by an invisible string, the zombies turned their heads in unison. Their clouded, lifeless eyes locked onto the dark entrance of the tunnel. Woovava! A deafening horn blast, like a roar from the abyss, broke the silence. The blood-red mechanical beast surged forth from the tunnel like a war god awakening from its ancient slumber, carrying boundless rage and the dormant power of countless years. Arg! Aga! The zombies howled and lunged forward like crazed beasts. But their decayed brains couldn't comprehend that the deafening sound was not prey but a steel monster with a terrifying 18,500 horsepower. Crunch! Crunch! The accelerating infinite train barreled through them like an unstoppable force, instantly creating a rain of blood and a tide of shredded flesh. Severed limbs flew everywhere. In the cockpit, Lin Xian's gaze flickered as the pent-up tension of the past 10 days was finally unleashed in full force. Yes. Lin Xian shouted in exhilaration. In this moment, he felt an unparalleled euphoria, as if breaking through the darkness and stepping into the light of dawn. It was a clear sign his plan had taken its first successful step. Clang clang, clang clang. With excitement coursing through him, the heavy locomotive raced along the tracks. Lin Xian observed the city outside, now reduced to a desolate wasteland, while continuously searching for any useful information. The zombies wandering the streets posed relatively less of a threat to ordinary people unless they triggered a massive zombie tide. Of course, zombies that were once animals like dogs or wolves were often far more troublesome than their human counterparts. Buzz, buzz. Lin Xian tried calling Chen Sixuan again, but her phone was still unreachable. When the call failed, he put away his phone and prepared to pick her up in person. Lin Xian wasn't someone who second-guessed himself. Once he made a plan, he wouldn't waver. Unless Chen Sixuan was already dead, he wouldn't change his course. The subway tracks were far more navigable than he had anticipated. Perhaps because they were usually enclosed, or maybe because no one had been foolish enough to drive cars onto the tracks, there were no significant obstacles along the way. The station nearest Yashui Gardens was Taoshi Station, which used to be a bustling subway hub packed with people. As the train entered the underground tunnel, Lin Xian gradually reduced its speed. After all, he would soon have to get off the train to search for Chen Sixuan. If he made too much noise and drew the attention of too many zombies, it would make his task far more difficult. Screech. Instead of pulling into the station, Lin Xian stopped the train some distance away. He first went to the number 2 carriage, where he saw that the girl was still asleep. This surprised him. How could anyone sleep for this long? Hey. Lin Xian lightly patted her cheek, but there was no response. So he reached out and pinched her face. Her tender skin was soft and elastic. Despite the blood stains, her delicate features were impossible to hide. She was clearly a beauty in the making, likely a girl from some wealthy family. Forget it, let her sleep, Lin Xian muttered to himself. To be safe, he sealed off the passageways between the number 3 carriage and the number 1 carriage. Then, grabbing his short blade, he carefully surveyed the surroundings before disembarking. Following the path along the tracks, Lin Xian ran into the station. Yashui Gardens, Building 3. Unit 901. Chen Sixuan hadn't slept all night. The immense mental pressure had left her pale and drained. Her once beautiful face was devoid of any color. At the moment, she was curled up in the corner of her couch, her head buried against her knees. Scattered around her were books on planetary orbital rails. Her eyes were hollow, her dry lips moving incessantly as she murmured to herself. Jianjiao line. Code HX05681. Total length, 1,256 kilometers. Stops at primary stations, Jiangning Station, Yubei Station. Secondary stations, Yushan Station, Biwang Station. Since her last call had gone through yesterday, Chen Sixuan had placed all her hopes on the arrival of a speeding train. But as time passed, despair began to creep in, slowly eroding the last shreds of her sanity. Biwang Station, Maintenance Section. Her muttering abruptly stopped, and a slight tremor flickered in her eyes. A memory surfaced of a student she had barely paid attention to back then. From a regular family, always wearing a warm smile, quiet by nature, not very social, and not particularly athletic. Everything about him had seemed ordinary. Then she recalled his talk about a railroad train project, his plan to operate a heavy locomotive and escape along the planetary orbital rail. Thinking about it now, wasn't that idea a bit too far-fetched? Does he even know how to drive a train? If he has that much fuel or energy, wouldn't it be easier to just drive a car? Chen Sixuan muttered to herself. Every question felt like a sharp blade, slicing through the fragile hope she clung to. What if the track is broken? Would her former student be able to fix it? Or would she, a foreign language teacher, have to? One question after another, too overwhelming to confront, bubbled up in her mind, gradually consuming her. The slim strand of hope she had seemed increasingly ridiculous. Tears the size of beans welled up in her eyes and dripped down, one by one. But Chen Sixuan didn't dare to give up just yet. She bit her lip hard, refusing to let her tears overflow, and silently repeated to herself. He promised. He said he'd come. Biwang Station. One main track, 2 arrival and departure tracks. Her muttering filled the empty living room once again. Knock, knock, knock. A sudden knocking broke the silence, like a stone tossed into a calm lake, sending ripples through the air. In the stillness of the room, the sound was deafening. Chen Sixuan lifted her head, her eyes lighting up with a glimmer of hope. Was it him? Barefoot, she ran to the door from the couch. But instead of looking through the peephole, she stood nervously and asked in a trembling voice, Who is it? The response from the other side, however, was not the voice she longed to hear. Instead, it was the voice of a middle-aged man. Teacher Chen, it's me, Liang Wei. I've been trying to call you for 2 days, but you didn't answer. I got worried, so I came to check on you. At that moment, Chen Sixuan's hope plummeted into the abyss. Liang Wei was a former colleague of hers. Back when they worked at the university, he had been a sleazy man who hid behind a respectable facade. His eyes often wandered inappropriately over Chen Sixuan, and she had even heard rumors that he had preyed on several female students before. He was a true predator disguised as a professional. For reasons unknown, perhaps due to having connections, this man had managed to rise to the position of office director at the university. Chen Sixuan had always despised him and kept her interactions with him to a minimum. Unfortunately, in the apocalypse, it turned out Liang Wei lived in the same residential complex and even in the same unit. Since the world had fallen apart, Liang Wei had called her repeatedly. At first, he pretended to be serious, saying that during a crisis, everyone needed to stick together. He claimed to have plenty of supplies and even offered to share them if she needed anything. But gradually, his true nature surfaced. Especially after learning that Chen Sixuan was running low on supplies, he became increasingly impatient, frequently suggesting she move in with him. Now, hearing Liang Wei's voice at the door, Chen Sixuan couldn't tell if her nausea was from disappointment or pure disgust. Clenching her stomach, she responded coldly, I'm fine. Bang, bang, bang. The knocking grew heavier. Fine? Didn't you tell me before that you were running out of food? When Chen Sixuan still didn't open the door, Liang Wei pressed his face against the peephole to try and look inside. Seeing his shadow against the door, Chen Sixuan instinctively stepped back with a frown. Liang Wei's eyes lit up the moment he spotted her silhouette. Teacher Chen. Are you hungry? I still have plenty of bread, cookies, canned beef, and bottled water. If you want, I'll bring it down for you right now. Bread, cookies, canned beef, bottled water. The names of these foods sounded almost intoxicating as they reached Chen Sixuan's ears, tempting her reason to crumble. She hadn't eaten for 2 days. But deep down, she knew. Whether Liang Wei really had those supplies or not, opening the door would mean turning herself into his personal plaything in this post-apocalyptic hell. Shame or survival, which one was more important? After receiving no response for some time, Liang Wei's last ounce of patience snapped. His expression darkened, and he suddenly slapped the door hard with his hand. Bang! Chen Sixuan, you effing BTCH. Stop pretending to be so high and mighty. The world's already gone to hell, and most people are dead. At least if you stick with me, you'll survive a few more days. I'm not going to eat you or anything. What the hell are you afraid of? Open the damn door. Bang, bang, bang. The knocking escalated to kicking, and the loud thuds reverberated through the room. Chen Sixuan's face turned deathly pale. She spun around, grabbing a fruit knife from the shoe cabinet for self-defense. Holding it close to her chest, her eyes filled with panic and turmoil. Director Liang clearly overestimated his strength. There was no way his 50-something, depraved self could break through a heavy steel security door. Eventually, he calmed down and stopped kicking the door, realizing that too much noise might attract unwanted monsters, which would be like shooting himself in the foot. His eyes flickered with calculation, and he spoke to the person inside in a sinister tone. "That's fine, Teacher Chen. I just happen to have some leftover canned meat. To show my sincerity, I'll leave it at your door. After all, it'll be dark soon. You can either open the door and eat it yourself, or let the monsters eat you instead. Who knows? Maybe after you die tonight, I'll find your body while it's still warm and—" Before he could finish his vile threat, a muffled squelch echoed from outside the door. The foul-mouthed Liang Wei suddenly fell silent. Thud. A sound of something heavy collapsing followed. Chen Sixuan trembled in shock. Slowly, she crept toward the peephole, pressing her eye against it. The sight outside the door made her pupils contract violently. Outside, a familiar young man was pulling a blade from Liang Wei's head. Lin Xian. Director Liang had been taken down in a single strike. Chen Sixuan gasped in disbelief. She hadn't fully processed what she was seeing when Lin Xian's voice came from outside. "Teacher Chen, if you're still alive, I suggest we don't waste time." His voice sent a shiver down her spine. He came. He came to take her away. A visible wave of emotion washed over Chen Sixuan's face. The sight of Liang Wei's lifeless body filled her with a sense of cathartic relief. Summoning a courage she didn't know she had, she opened the door without hesitation. Lin Xian, she stammered instinctively, glancing at the blood-covered short blade in his hand. She couldn't help but take 2 steps back, unsure if her feelings were closer to relief or fear. Her gaze fell on Liang Wei's corpse. His head was nearly split open to the eyebrows. He lay on the ground, his eyes wide open, red and white fluids oozing out in a gruesome mess. Ugh. Chen Sixuan couldn't hold it in anymore and bent over, retching. But with nothing in her stomach after 2 days without food, only stomach acid came up. Lin Xian looked at the frail and disheveled Chen Sixuan standing before him. She was a far cry from the vibrant and confident Teacher Chen he remembered, who even exuded a commanding elegance during her classes. A pang of pity rose in his chest. Today, Chen Sixuan wore a pair of denim jeans paired with a sporty top and a lightweight windbreaker, likely her idea of appropriate attire for escaping. Scum like him is no different from an animal. Don't burden yourself with guilt. Are your belongings packed? Lin Xian's gaze swept over the rows of high heels by the shoe cabinet before landing on her bare feet. Yes. I'm ready. Forcing herself to suppress the turmoil in her heart, Chen Sixuan quickly regained her composure. She didn't want to appear weak in front of Lin Xian. She bent down to put on her shoes, deliberately avoiding looking at Liang Wei's body. Without saying much, Lin Xian stepped inside, scouring the apartment. He grabbed a cardboard box and stuffed several small appliances from her kitchen, including a coffee maker and a juicer, into it before shoving it into her arms. Hold this. Huh? Why are you taking these? Chen Sixuan instinctively asked as she took the box. Her voice was a mix of nervousness and curiosity. She couldn't understand why Lin Xian was grabbing random appliances. But Lin Xian, her rescuer, didn't answer, and she quickly swallowed her questions. She obediently held the box and followed him. Chen Sixuan's luggage consisted of just a small travel bag containing a few changes of clothes and barely anything else of significance. Except for 1 box of condoms. Though she had never been with anyone, as an educated and independent woman, she had always believed in protecting herself. It was a habit she developed after adulthood. Now, in the apocalypse, in this harsh environment, pregnancy was equivalent to a death sentence. No matter what lay ahead, this was her last line of self-protection. Beyond that, she had no food or water left. Upstairs, in apartment 1203, Liang Wei's home. The door was locked, but Lin Xian placed his hand on it, fiddled for a moment, and the lock clicked open. Liang Wei had claimed to have plenty of food and water, and Lin Xian wasn't about to let such supplies go to waste while preparing for their journey. But as soon as the door opened, a revolting stench wafted out. Chen Sixuan peeked over Lin Xian's shoulder, and the sight inside nearly made her faint. Ugh! She gagged again, her stomach churning violently. Even Lin Xian's face turned pale. His brows furrowed deeply as he surveyed the scene. There wasn't a trace of food or water in the house. Instead, the apartment was splattered with blood and gore. In the kitchen lay half a mutilated corpse, likely that of a middle-aged woman, clearly butchered. Lin Xian's expression darkened further as a wave of nausea hit him. Liang Wei hadn't been hoarding food. He had been killing people. It wasn't hard to figure out the unfortunate woman in the kitchen was likely the original owner of the apartment, Director Liang's wife. I owe animals an apology. Calling him a beast is a massive insult to beasts, Lin Xian muttered coldly. Let's go. Stay close to me, and try not to make any noise. Realizing there was nothing of value left to scavenge, he turned decisively and walked out. Okay. Chen Sixuan's face was pale as she nodded. She was completely in shock. There are a lot of dead out there. Don't scream. Okay? At all times, watch your step. Don't trip. Okay. After witnessing such horrors, Chen Sixuan now resembled a compliant student, listening intently to everything Lin Xian said. Her instincts told her that following Lin Xian was the right decision. Squelch. Inside the station, Lin Xian casually cleaved through a few zombies' heads as he led Chen Sixuan down the narrow maintenance path alongside the platform. Chen Sixuan followed closely behind, her face ashen, struggling to suppress the nausea bubbling in her stomach. She hadn't imagined the outside world had become such a living hell. It was as if the entire city had turned into a scene from the worst nightmares imaginable. The grotesque sight of Liang Wei's apartment would undoubtedly haunt her dreams forever. In the dark subway tunnel, the only sounds were their hurried footsteps and strained breathing. Before long, a faint light illuminated a massive shadow in the distance. As the dim track lights revealed the enormous train, Chen Sixuan's mouth parted slightly in astonishment. The sheer size of the train left her stunned. But as Lin Xian approached it, the heavy locomotive roared to life. Its headlights blazed forth, bathing her in their light. Stop gawking, get on, Lin Xian called. Okay. Lin Xian reached out, took the small appliances from her arms, and then firmly grabbed her hand, pulling her onto the train. They entered the driver's cabin, and Lin Xian shut the thick iron door behind them. Inside, the bright lighting and the enclosed steel walls instantly gave Chen Sixuan an overwhelming sense of security. Lin Xian, you really know how to drive a train? She asked hesitantly. Do you think I pushed this thing all the way here? Lin Xian replied with a faint smile, his demeanor relaxing slightly after locking the door. Placing his hand on the floor, he activated the mechanical heart, turning off the train's headlights. He then guided her to the number 1 carriage, where he rummaged through the supplies, eventually pulling out a loaf of bread and a bottle of water. He tossed them to her. You look like you haven't eaten in days. Here, Eve. Tears welled up in Chen Sixuan's eyes as she gratefully accepted the food. Silent tears streamed down her face as she bit her lip, trembling on the verge of an emotional breakdown. In a choked voice, she said, thank you. She was truly starving. without even taking off her backpack. She tore open the bread packaging and began devouring it in large bites, tears continuing to roll down her face. Lin Xian sat across from her, recovering his energy while observing her. Seeing a familiar face brought him a sense of solace. In this post-apocalyptic world, where death and despair loomed at every turn, no one was immune to the crushing fear of loneliness, not even Lin Xian. Humans are social creatures. And after the collapse of the internet, that isolation became almost unbearable. Operating the infinite train and using his wind cannon skill both consumed a significant amount of energy. It was hard to describe, but using such powers placed a distinct burden on his body. Chen Si. Lin Xian began to say, his gaze flickering, before deciding, forget it. I'll just keep calling you Teacher Chen. Watching her wolf down the bread, Lin Xian decided it was time to set some ground rules. First off, he began seriously, I'm an ability user. This train can only be operated by me. If I die, you die too. Since I brought you on board, it means that from today onward, we're allies, we're teammates. You must trust me unconditionally and follow my orders. Otherwise, your fate will be very grim. Chen Sixuan swallowed a mouthful of bread, her eyes red as she stared at Lin Xian. She nodded firmly and said, I understand. From now on, I'll listen to you. Lin Xian nodded in satisfaction. As for what my ability is, you don't need to know. This train is our fortress, very sturdy, but it won't necessarily hold up against some of the monsters out there. And of course, there will be people who covet our supplies. When pushed to the brink, human greed can sometimes be more terrifying than any demon. That means there will be times when I'll need your help to solve problems, search for supplies, and even guard the train. Understood? Perhaps because she had eaten, Chen Sixuan seemed to have regained some strength. And one more thing, Teacher Chen. Lin Xian stood up slowly, his gaze serious as it bore into hers. You'd better prepare yourself, I will definitely sleep with you. Chen Sixuan's body visibly trembled at his words. She instinctively gripped the bread in her hands tighter, her disheveled hair falling over her face, hiding her conflicted expression. Hearing such blunt words from Lin Xian, the student she once taught, sent a jolt through her heart. Lowering her head, she let out a faint in acknowledgement, considering it a response. She continued eating her bread in silence, but her heart pounded furiously in her chest. Clang, clang. Since the polar night ended, this was the first time the sound of a locomotive on the tracks had been heard in Zhang City. Naturally, the noise of this mechanical beast drew the attention of some survivors who had been staying low in their homes near the railway. Curious eyes followed the massive locomotive in surprise as it rumbled past. Chen Sixuan wolfed down a piece of bread and gulped down more than half a bottle of water before finally feeling like she had pulled herself back from the icy grip of death. Sitting quietly for a moment, she let herself feel the slow and steady motion of the train. A sense of bittersweet relief washed over her. It felt like she'd narrowly escaped disaster. Snapping out of her daze, Chen Sixuan began observing the steel carriage that gave her such a strong sense of security. The windows were welded shut with thick steel plates, leaving only small grated holes through which the outside scenery blurred by in retreat. The original seating in the passenger car had been completely removed, transformed into a living area. There was a mat and a tent on the floor, and most of the space was taken up by supplies. Beyond that, there was still the restroom from the old passenger car. Though cramped and somewhat chaotic, the setup gave off a sense of completeness and a strange, comforting safety. Turning to look at the second carriage, she noticed it was mostly empty, with waterproof bags holding unknown supplies. Then, her mouth suddenly fell open in shock. In the corner of the second carriage lay a girl, her hands and feet tied. Her eyes were closed, and it was unclear whether she was alive or dead. Startled, Chen Sixuan quickly covered her mouth, unsure of what to make of the situation. Could this girl have been kidnapped by Lin Xian? but the thought didn't make sense. In this kind of apocalyptic environment, what value could there be in kidnapping a little girl? Unless... As her thoughts ran wild, she failed to notice that Lin Xian had already entered the carriage. "Miss Chen." "Ah." Chen Sixuan, lost in her thoughts, was startled by his voice. Turning around with a panicked look, she saw Lin Xian standing there, his expression calm. Feeling better, he asked, Who is she?" Chen Sixuan asked hesitantly, her heart uneasy as she pointed towards the second carriage. Lin Xian followed her gaze to the tied-up girl and replied, "I don't know who she is. She suddenly appeared outside my home and begged me to save her. She's been unconscious ever since. For safety reasons, I had no choice but to tie her up." Hearing this, Chen Sixuan let out a long sigh of relief and even gave herself a self-deprecating smile. She had willingly asked to join Lin Xian's train. No matter what her fate turned out to be, it had been her own choice. What was there to worry about? "So, are we leaving the city now?" she asked. "Not yet," Lin Xian replied. "There are still some essential supplies I need to gather. Plus, I want to test the train's performance. We have 4 days left until the polar night. It should be enough time." Chen Sixuan looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "What do you need me to do?" Since she was now in this together with him, she felt she had to prove her value and not just be a pretty face. "There are a few things," Lin Xian said. He pulled out a travelogue from the cockpit and handed it to her. "I'll handle driving. Your job will be to record the daily route, mileage, stops, and the train's condition. Since we still don't know the patterns and coverage of the dark tides, we'll also need to track the changing sunrise times during our escape. This is critical. If we head in the wrong direction, we might never escape the polar night." Chen Sixuan nodded solemnly. "Got it? I can handle this." And Lin Xian's gaze swept over the carriage. "For now, it's just the two of us. I need you to inventory and manage the supplies. Also, keep an eye on that girl." Chen Sixuan glanced back at the sleeping girl, surprised. "You don't need me to go with you when you're looking for supplies." The unspoken question was clear. "Do you trust me enough to leave me alone on the train?" Lin Xian chuckled faintly. "Didn't I just say it's just the two of us? If we both leave the train, who's going to guard it?" He had picked up on the underlying question but didn't explicitly address it. In reality, the train's fuel tank was completely empty. No one could drive it away, even the most experienced driver. Lin Xian also wasn't worried about being locked out. He was confident in his precautions, though he deliberately kept his cards close to his chest. In the apocalypse, even someone like Chen Sixuan, who had seemed so kind and gentle before, couldn't be trusted completely. Still, for now, he had to show some measure of trust, at least on the surface. Understood. Chen Sixuan hadn't expected Lin Xian to trust her this much. A strange warmth welled up in her heart, leaving her oddly touched. For a moment, she even felt a dynamic akin to the man handles the outside, and the woman takes care of the inside. And when she remembered that he was her student, a faintly awkward feeling bubbled up within her. Clang, clang. The infinite train crept forward at an extremely slow speed on Zhang City's urban light rail. Lin Xian followed the map's planned route, aiming to proceed along Line 3 while staying alert to any developments on the road ahead. Devour successful, mechanical source points +1, mechanical devour skill proficiency +1, bonus reward, your defense +1. Current mechanical heart level, LV.1177/500. Note: upgrading the mechanical heart unlocks special skill rewards. When the mechanical heart reaches LV3, LV6, and LV9, a mysterious awakening will occur. Basic attributes: Strength, LV122/50. Speed, LV028/30. Defense, LV 0.16/30. Current basic skills. Mechanical Devour LV.1266/300. Mechanical Manufacturing LV.1112/300. Mechanical Scan, Passive. Mechanical Repair, Passive. Mechanical Operation, Passive. Special Skills. Wind Cannon LV.13/100. Inside the cockpit, Lin Xian began systematically devouring a few small home appliances he had brought from Chen Sixuan's home. With the journey ahead, he needed to remain constantly focused and seize every opportunity to enhance his strength. Devour successful, Mechanical Source Points +1, Mechanical Devour Skill Proficiency +1. Devour successful, Mechanical Source Points +2, Mechanical Devour Skill Proficiency +1. Current Mechanical Heart Level, LV.1180/500. Mechanical Devour LV.1268/300. It's still too slow. Lin Xian sighed as he watched the pink teddy bear blender in his hands crumble to ash. If he had enough time, devouring cars, or even trains could probably grant him dozens or even hundreds of mechanical source points in one go. Moreover, based on his earlier experience with the hair dryer, he couldn't help but wonder if other special skills might emerge from devouring different items. The thought filled him with excitement. This ability was truly game-changing. His mechanical heart system didn't just allow him to control machinery and drive the train, it could also create machinery. It was essentially a creative mode. In this post-apocalyptic world where the industrial systems of humanity had collapsed, this was practically an unbeatable advantage. The most critical aspect was that this ability could also enhance his attributes and grant him new skills. Compared to other abilities, its versatility was on a completely different level. According to Lin Xian's plan, achieving a sustainable survival loop for the train hinged first and foremost on the issue of energy. His special ability solved most of the energy problem, but its major drawback was that it consumed his physical strength and required constant focus. This made it difficult for him to multitask with other complex tasks. Next on the list were defense and food for survival. However, Lin Xian knew these goals couldn't be achieved overnight. The first carriage alone, along with its exterior armor, had already consumed several months of his effort. Hoping to accomplish everything immediately was nothing but wishful thinking. Moreover, he was working alone. Chen Sixuan, while helpful in other areas, couldn't contribute much in terms of technical expertise. I'll need to find a few teammates eventually, Lin Xian thought to himself. First, I'll need an engine crew to handle the mechanical maintenance of the entire train and help with driving. I'll also need someone who knows about planting. For example, a botanist or a hydroponics expert, someone who can grow fresh vegetables and fruits, and maybe even provide water and oxygen purification. Right, speaking of food, I'll also need a chef. And a doctor, obviously. You never know when someone might fall seriously ill. And we can't just rely on specialists. I'll need fighters too, ideally, some ability users. Oh, and I'll need a sentinel team. As Lin Xian continued down his train of thought, his plans became increasingly ambitious. Shaking his head, he took a deep breath and refocused on driving the train. OS Furniture City. Spotting a massive building in the distance, Lin Xian's expression turned serious. This place is usually a furniture and home goods store with very little foot traffic. There shouldn't be many supplies here, but I could grab some cold weather gear, bedding and the like. He wasn't thinking about frivolous things between men and women, but rather about the significant drop in temperatures worldwide since the apocalypse. Areas affected by the abyss phenomenon had seen dramatic cooling. Despite it being August, summer in Jiang City, daytime temperatures had dropped to around 12 or 13 degrees Celsius, while nighttime temperatures were only a few degrees above freezing. And it was still getting colder each day. Lin Xian speculated that the dark tides, caused by the abyss blotting out the sky, had severely impacted the climate. It was possible that an ice age or a prolonged cold period was approaching. In such times, preparing cold weather gear in advance was undoubtedly the smart move. Kryok. Lin Xian brought the train to a halt on an exposed section of the tracks. The railway was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence, with a city avenue running alongside it. The road was littered with abandoned vehicles, but the area itself was sparsely populated. Even zombies were few and far between, making the surroundings eerily quiet. The flat terrain, lack of tunnels or elevated tracks, and the presence of the fence made this spot relatively safe for unloading items. "Miss Chen, wait on the train for me. I'll go check it out inside," Lin Xian said as he strapped on his backpack and picked up his short blade. "Also, don't open the door for anyone other than me." "I understand," Chen Sixuan replied, though her expression was a little tense. "Wouldn't it be better if I helped you? If there's a lot to carry, it might go faster." "That won't be necessary for now," Lin Xian replied. "This place has clearly already been looted once. There might not be anything useful. Let me scout first, and if there's something worth taking, you can come down and help move it." As he spoke, he tossed her a walkie-talkie. "Let's use this to stay in touch. Cell signals aren't reliable." "Got it," Chen Sixuan said, gripping the walkie-talkie tightly. Lin Xian opened the cabin door and leapt down from the train, scanning his surroundings. After confirming it was safe, he climbed over the chain-link fence and dropped into the greenery on the other side. From there, he crossed the street toward the furniture store. The front of the store had a vast parking lot that was now in complete disarray. Scattered around were several cars, all clearly out of commission. Devouring these cars with his ability would be an excellent option. They were one of the most common mechanical items in the apocalypse. However, the problem lay in the time it took to devour them. Lin Xian guessed that leveling up his mechanical devour skill would improve its efficiency, so for now, he played it safe. Instead of devouring items in risky environments, he planned to bring them back to the train and process them in safety. At the store's main entrance, the ground was covered with dried, dark red blood. Shards of what looked like brand new merchandise were scattered everywhere. The cold wind swept through the scene, giving it a bleak and desolate atmosphere. Cautiously, Lin Xian stepped inside. The space immediately opened up, feeling vast and empty. He'd visited the store before. It had been lavishly decorated, with wide, quiet aisles and little foot traffic. Now, after the apocalypse, it was completely deserted. He didn't even see many corpses here. Lin Xian wandered through the branded furniture stores inside the mall. Other than the lights being off, most of the shops were still clean and orderly, with sofas, mattresses, and other furnishings neatly displayed. The second floor housed bathroom fixtures. The vast, empty building gave off an eerie vibe as he walked through it alone. "This Simmons mattress is pretty good, firm yet soft. Latex mattresses, thick comforters." These types of supplies seemed to hold little value in the apocalypse, which was why the majority of the stores here hadn't been looted. It made sense when survival is on the line. The first places people think to raid are supermarkets and convenience stores, not a furniture mall to grab pillows. Lin Xian browsed for a while before realizing a headache-inducing issue. These items were bulky. Taking them back wouldn't be easy. After scouting the area, he eventually reached the loading dock via the fourth exit. There, he spotted a few forklifts and a flatbed truck. His eyes lit up instantly. However, just as he approached, a rotting zombie suddenly burst out of the nearby freight elevator and lunged at him. Erg. The stench of decay hit him full force, and Lin Xian reflexively took a quick step back. Once he got a clear look, he immediately raised his hand and aimed. Boom! A blast of air shot out like a cannon, instantly creating a gaping hole in the zombie's skull. Thud! The zombie collapsed to the ground, twitched a couple of times, and went still. The zombie was still wearing an orange-yellow worker's uniform. It had likely been a dock worker seeking refuge in the building before things went south. Wind Cannon LV.14/100. Every time Lin Xian used this ability, his skill proficiency increased by 1 point. However, he noticed the move consumed a significant amount of his energy. He needed to use it sparingly. With this in mind, he drew the short blade from his back. Against ordinary zombies, he didn't feel much pressure as an ability user. As long as he didn't trigger a zombie horde or provoke some other monstrosities, things would be manageable. Lin Xian climbed into the flatbed truck's cab. The door was already open, and the fuel cap had been removed, clearly indicating someone had beaten him to it. As expected, when he activated his mechanical heart, he quickly discovered that the reserve battery was completely dead, making it impossible to start the engine. It wasn't surprising that others had siphoned the fuel and abandoned the truck. This kind of small flatbed, with its simplistic design and low horsepower, wasn't a desirable vehicle for most survivors. But for Lin Xian, this was a treasure delivered right to his doorstep. He got out of the truck and went over to one of the forklifts. Activating his ability, he started the machine without any trouble. Then, with a bold and confident air, he drove the forklift straight through the rear entrance of the furniture mall. His plan was simple: make his living space in the first carriage as comfortable as possible. In the apocalypse, having a cozy living environment could significantly improve morale. With his unique ability, Lin Xian had no intention of living like a sewer rat, barely scraping by in dark and filthy shelters. OS Furniture City was located on Jiang City's outer ring road, an area typically sparsely populated. With no survivors randomly seeking refuge in the furniture mall, Lin Xian had free rein to go about his business without interruption. He checked the time, 4:30 p.m. There were still over 2 hours until sunset. Without hesitation, Lin Xian started his haul by selecting a high-quality, understated sectional leather sofa. He used the forklift to load it onto the flatbed truck, then moved on to grab a foldable steel-framed bed. While the third carriage doors were relatively large, fitting a wooden bed frame inside was clearly impractical, so he decided to weld the steel frame directly into the carriage. With a foldable Simmons mattress and latex topper, it would still be quite comfortable. Of course, he wouldn't forget pillows and blankets. The more Lin Xian scavenged, the happier he became. Then, he spotted a 60-inch flat-screen TV hanging on the wall of one of the branded stores, and his eyes lit up. An entertainment area could be nice. Playing some games or watching movies during downtime doesn't sound bad, he muttered to himself. Take it. Without a second thought, Lin Xian dismantled the TV and soon had the flatbed truck packed to the brim. If it weren't for the limited space in the bathroom of the first carriage, he might have taken an entire set of toilets and bathtubs from the showroom. Vroom. The small truck's engine roared to life as Lin Xian activated his mechanical heart, causing his eyes to glow faintly. He drove the truck, now fully loaded with loot, down the mall parking lot's main road and onto the greenery next to the tracks. With a stomp on the gas pedal, he smashed through the chain-link fence separating the railway and bumped the truck onto the gravel slope beside the tracks. Chen Sixuan had been waiting on the train for over an hour when she suddenly saw Lin Xian driving a truck towards them. Her eyes widened in disbelief. When she noticed the truck was loaded with sofas, mattresses, and even a TV, her shock turned into confusion. Is this even considered supplies? In the apocalypse, wasn't it more critical to look for water, food, or even weapons? She felt a little dazed, but when Lin Xian parked the truck behind the third carriage, she quickly ran over to help. Clang whir. The third carriage's rear liftgate slowly lowered. Lin Xian, carrying his short blade on his back, climbed aboard and moved the motorcycle and crane aside. Together, the two began transferring the sofa, bed frame, mattress, pillows, blankets, rug, and TV into the first carriage. By the time everything was finished, the sun had set, leaving the sky awash with the lasty hues of twilight. Both of them were drenched in sweat. Beep beep, beep beep. The alarm on Lin Xian's watch went off. His expression turned serious as he said to Chen Sixuan, "Go over there, eat something, and get yourself organized. I need to deal with this truck." He had a bold idea. Since the truck was already here, why not take the chance to devour it? Even though it was risky, nighttime brought dangers far greater than ordinary zombies. Lin Xian didn't want to miss this rare opportunity to upgrade himself. He decided to take the gamble. "Oh, okay," Chen Sixuan replied, obedient as ever. She now seemed like a compliant and supportive partner, immediately following through on Lin Xian's instructions. Once Chen Sixuan left the third carriage, Lin Xian took out a special tow hook he had crafted and attached it to the train. He looped the metal cable around his waist and, as the last light of day faded, climbed down from the train. Resting a hand on the small truck, he activated Mechanical Devour without hesitation. Devour progress, 1%. The familiar sensation of devouring a vehicle returned. Lin Xian could feel his energy rapidly draining, while the progress bar for the devouring process moved painfully slowly compared to smaller items like appliances. With one hand pressed firmly on the truck, his other gripped the metal tow hook tightly. He had attached the hook to ensure he could maintain a physical connection to the infinite train for emergency control. His ability could only manipulate machines he was in direct contact with, and even a slight distance like this one, connected by a metal cable, would disable his control. Devour progress, 2%. Devour progress, 3%. Time ticked by, second by second. The surroundings were eerily silent. With no light sources around, the world grew increasingly dark as the sun fully disappeared below the horizon. Lin Xian's expression grew tense as the devouring process continued at its sluggish pace. In his dazed state, Lin Xian inexplicably felt as though the earth itself was breathing. Is this the dark tides? 6:45 p.m. The sky suddenly plunged into darkness. It wasn't a gradual shift, it was as if someone had flipped a switch, leaving an eerie, unnatural blackness. For more than 2 months now, survivors had grown somewhat accustomed to this abrupt transition. All they could do was pray for the night to pass quickly. Only at dawn would they dare to leave their shelters to scavenge for life-sustaining supplies. But deep down, everyone knew the grim reality. After the polar night, food and water would eventually run out. Would dawn still come then? No one could say for certain. Hiding in a shelter was akin to waiting for a slow death, but migrating or fleeing was a high-stakes gamble. Reinforced concrete and steel doors couldn't always fend off the horrors lurking in the night. And in the wilderness or inside a car, survival odds were even slimmer. No choice was truly safe. This was why ability users had become the leaders of survival teams. With powers beyond human capability, they offered a security greater than any steel and cement could provide. Before the network completely collapsed during the polar night, Lin Xian had seen many ability users showing off their strange powers online. They quickly became viral sensations, garnering admiration and envy. People flocked to them, and they soon emerged as apocalyptic leaders. Governments also focused on studying and cooperating with these individuals. When Lin Xian first posted about the Infinite Train recruitment project on forums, he had toyed with the idea of revealing his ability. He thought it might attract a wave of followers. But he quickly dismissed the idea. He realized he didn't have the capacity to manage hundreds, let alone thousands, of survivors in an apocalyptic world. While his ability was remarkable, it wasn't enough for even consistent self-preservation yet. If he became a leader, his most valuable contribution would likely be driving the train and repairing machinery. But what if, instead of being their leader, he ended up being treated as a human battery? That would be a nightmare. In hindsight, his concerns were completely justified. In just 2 months, stories of atrocities committed over supplies had become all too common: betrayals, murders, and even massacres among survivors. And the powerful ability users. They wielded powers that defied logic and comprehension. Compared to them, Lin Xian's ability seemed rather unremarkable in the early stages of the apocalypse. Devour progress, 63%. An hour into the night, the devouring process had finally passed the halfway mark. Lin Xian maintained absolute focus, keeping his senses sharp as he monitored the pitch-black surroundings. He had turned off all the train's lights, blending seamlessly into the darkness. Even his breathing was slow and steady. With one hand resting on the small truck, he silently continued the devouring process. To avoid exposing the faint glow in his eyes caused by the mechanical heart, Lin Xian even kept his eyes shut, relying entirely on his ears to detect any movement. The chain-link fences along the railway should produce noise if something approached, and if anything moved along the tracks, it ought to make a sound as well. Devour progress, 77%. Almost there. It's almost done. Crack. A faint sound of gravel shifting suddenly broke the silence. Lin Xian froze. Lin Xian furrowed his brow and held his breath. Crack, crack. The sound grew closer, heavy and deliberate. His heart skipped a beat. It didn't sound like the movements of any zombie. Instead, it resembled the sound of a wooden cane tapping against gravel. Slowly, he opened his eyes, unsure if the faint glow from his mechanical heart could be detected. Yet when he looked around, there was nothing unusual. The only thing inside was the vague, dark silhouette of the small truck before him. He turned to glance behind him. The infinite train stood silently on the tracks, with no sound coming from inside the carriages. Even Chen Sixuan, likely due to the arrival of nightfall, had remained quiet. Perhaps she'd fallen asleep. Everything was unnervingly silent. Despite the stillness, Lin Xian's heart was gripped with unease. He was certain he'd heard something, and his keen sixth sense told him that he was being watched by some unknown presence. His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm, pushing his mechanical devour ability with all his might. Faster. Faster. Gone was the relaxed mood he had felt while hauling furniture in the afternoon. The memory of the terrifying encounter with Grandpa Li last night made his entire body run cold. He desperately wished to retreat to the safety of the train as soon as possible. Devour progress, 98%. Almost there. Almost done. It had taken nearly an hour and a half, but the results would undoubtedly be worth it if he succeeded. Devour successful, mechanical source points plus 30, mechanical devour skill proficiency plus 10. Bonus reward, strength plus 5, speed plus 5, defense plus 2. Congratulations! Your speed attribute has been upgraded to LV.13/50. As a faint glow flashed across his vision, Lin Xian finally breathed a sigh of relief. His mechanical source points had skyrocketed, and with the upgrade in speed, his vision began to sharpen. Whoosh! As the devouring process concluded, the small truck disintegrated into ash. Loose items clattered to the ground, the noise shattering the stillness of the night. But just as Lin Xian was beginning to relax, he heard a low, resonant hum above him. Hilvoing. The sound was chillingly strange, like a ship's broken horn echoing through a rusted metal pipe. It didn't sound human. Nor did it sound like any machine he had ever encountered. A cold shiver ran down Lin Xian's back. He snapped his head upwards, and what he saw nearly made his soul leave his body. Standing beside him was a humanoid creature, nearly 3 meters tall, with pale, ashen skin. Its lanky frame seemed grotesquely elongated, with arms that dangled past its knees. Atop its misshapen head sat a gaping crimson maw, grotesquely large and filled with sharp, glistening teeth. Its 2 round, glowing red eyes burned like embers as they stared down at Lin Xian with an unsettling intensity. It had been standing there silently for who knew how long, unnoticed until the noise from the truck's disintegration drew its attention. The realization sent chills down Lin Xian's spine. His scalp tingled, and his entire body screamed in alarm. Hilvoing. The creature emitted the eerie, low growl once again. Its long arm slowly raised, and its 5 razor-sharp fingers like steel claws reached viciously toward Lin Xian. Lin Xian's pupils contracted as he sucked in a sharp breath. If that thing grabs me, I'll be skewered into a human kebab. Luckily, his speed attribute had just leveled up. His reflexes had become far sharper than even he expected. Before the creature's claws could reach him, his body instinctively darted a step backward. Clang! A harsh screech of metal echoed as the creature's claws struck the railway tracks, sending a spray of sparks flying. The shrill sound of steel grinding against steel made Lin Xian's heart pound wildly. He didn't hesitate. Raising his hand, he aimed directly at the creature's head and unleashed a wind cannon. Boom! A muffled blast resounded, and the creature staggered back several steps as its grotesquely high-set head snapped to the side, as though struck by a heavy blow. However, Lin Xian's heart sank. The wind cannon hadn't pierced through its thick hide. Realizing how dire the situation was, Lin Xian didn't dare waste another second. He sprinted toward the infinite train and climbed aboard in one fluid motion. Activating his mechanical heart, he simultaneously raised the rear liftgate and started the train. Lights flickered on. The commotion startled Chen Sixuan, who appeared from the first carriage and shouted toward him, "Lin, what's going on? Quick! Go to the cockpit and help me watch the road." "Got it?" Sensing the urgency in his voice, Chen Sixuan immediately turned and bolted toward the cockpit without hesitation. Whir! The hydraulic liftgate began to rise slowly. For the first time, Lin Xian felt like it was moving at an unbearably sluggish pace. His fear was soon confirmed. Before the gate could fully close, a massive, pale hand suddenly reached in and grabbed hold of the liftgate. Its sinister black claws gouged deep into the steel, leaving several jagged grooves. What incredible strength! Lin Xian's eyes widened as the interior lights of the carriage illuminated the creature outside. The grotesque head bore only 2 blood-red holes for eyes, like bottomless abysses, and most of its face was dominated by a massive, gaping mouth filled with rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth. The sight of those jagged fangs made Lin Xian's scalp tingle. This thing was definitely not a zombie. His immediate thought was clear: this creature wasn't some mutated human or infected corpse. It wasn't even from this world. DNU. In his panic, Lin Xian shoved his fear aside, gritted his teeth, and sprang into action. He grabbed his short blade, leapt forward, and slashed down with all his might at the massive, pale hand gripping the liftgate. Clang! The strike did not meet flesh, but something as hard as steel. The force of the impact jolted his hand so hard that his palm went numb. Seeing a chip form on the edge of his blade, Lin Xian sucked in a cold breath. What the hell? It's that tough. Hilvoing. The pale giant let out its eerie, resonant growl once more. Though its movements seemed sluggish, its monstrous strength was undeniable. One hand remained clamped onto the liftgate, and as the infinite train dragged it along the tracks, it toppled over, but it didn't let go. Sparks flew as its massive body was hauled forward. Seemingly enraged, the creature raised its other hand and reached for the entire carriage, as if intending to tear it apart. Zzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzz. The screech of metal against metal rang out as the sheer force of the creature's grip caused the wheels of the third carriage to grind against the tracks, spraying sparks in every direction. Lin Xian's heart pounded wildly. The giant's strength was overwhelming, and its body impervious to blades or bullets. If it managed to derail the train, this night would surely spell his end. Acting decisively, Lin Xian raised his hand, channeled all his energy, and unleashed another wind cannon, this time aiming directly at the creature's blood-red left eye. Boom! With the added benefit of the train's lights, his attack landed with pinpoint accuracy. A spray of dark red blood gushed from the giant's left eye, staining its pale face crimson. The thick blood slowly dripped into its gaping maw, and the creature let out an ear-piercing screech of pain. The deafening howl was so sharp and shrill that Lin Xian felt every hair on his body stand on end, and his eardrums throbbed in pain. But his attack achieved its goal. The creature's massive hand released its grip on the liftgate. Finally, the hydraulic liftgate, smoking under the strain, managed to seal shut. Clang! Clang! The train's speed began to pick up, the rhythmic sound of wheels clattering against the tracks filling the air. Lin Xian immediately got to his feet and looked out, but with no exterior lights, the pale giant disappeared into the inky blackness in the blink of an eye. Phew! Lin Xian let out a long sigh of relief, collapsing onto the floor in exhaustion. His gaze fell on the rear liftgate, now marred with 3 deep, jagged claw marks. His hands trembled as he stared at the evidence of how close he had come to death. This was the first time in months that he had encountered something this terrifying. If the polar night is filled with things like that. D-N it, he muttered to himself, his voice trembling. At that moment, he truly understood the horror of the night. Escape. There was no other choice. They had to escape the abyss and the dark tides. Last night, it had been the insect-like creatures controlling corpses. Tonight, it was this pale giant. Who knew what other horrors might lurk in the blackness? Anyone who thought they could survive in the night was hopelessly deluded. The only path left for humanity was to flee the tides, to flee the polar night.